Let's kick off this explainer with a kind of wild question. Have you ever wondered why somebody can look completely thin on the outside, but actually be completely metabolically unhealthy on the inside? It's crazy, right? It's a paradox that literally upends everything we've been taught about diet, weight, and overall health. So welcome to today's explainer, the biochemistry of staying healthy, beyond the diet myths. We're going to completely strip away all that fad diet noise. Instead, we're diving into the absolute, objective, and honestly fascinating biochemical reality of exactly how our bodies process the food we eat. Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to break this whole factory down in 6 quick steps. 1. Food as fuel. 2. The cellular energy factory. 3. The truth about sugars. 4. Fat storage and metabolic syndrome. 5. Insulin, the master regulator. And finally 6. The holistic health picture. Let's get right into it.
All right, Section 1, Food as Fuel. These are the raw materials for the body. Basically, think of every bite of food you eat as a shipment of raw supplies being delivered to a highly advanced manufacturing plant.
So those incoming raw materials fall into 3 main buckets, our macronutrients. We've got carbohydrates, which break down into simple sugars like glucose and fructose. We have fats or lipids, which break down into fatty acids and glycerol, and proteins, which become amino acids. Now, while proteins are absolutely crucial for building things, like muscle and enzymes, it's really the carbs and the fats that serve as the main fuel sources for our body's energy supply.
But hey, if it's really just about supplying raw materials, why is it so incredibly hard to just stick to a healthy diet? Well, part of the problem comes down to a behavioral quirk called hyperbolic discounting. Basically, human nature strongly prefers a small, immediate reward over a much larger, delayed one. We are literally hardwired to choose the instant gratification of eating junk food right now, rather than holding out for that sort of abstract future reward of being metabolically healthy years down the line. It's tough.
Okay, moving to Section 2, the cellular energy factory, our microscopic engine. What actually happens when those raw materials make it inside the body?
See, our cells can't just use food straight up. They have to literally mint it into a biological currency. And that currency is called ATP, or adenosine triphosphate. When ATP loses a phosphate group, it releases the exact burst of energy our cells need to do physical and chemical work, and in the process, it becomes ADP. It's basically the cash our body uses to get anything done.
And the production line for minting this cash happens at absolute lightning speed, across 3 linked phases. First up is glycolysis, which happens out in the cell's fluid, the cytosol. Then the raw material moves deep into the mitochondria for the Krebs cycle, generating high-energy electron carriers. Finally, we hit oxidative phosphorylation in the electron transport chain. And that right there is where the massive energy payload is generated. Which brings us to this absolutely staggering number, 30 to 32. From just one single molecule of glucose, going through that production line, our bodies can yield roughly 30 to 32 molecules of ATP currency. I mean, talk about efficiency, right? But where is a massive chunk of this hard-earned currency actually being spent? Your brain. Get this, even though your brain accounts for only about 2% of your total body weight, it hogs an astonishing 20% of your daily energy. And since the brain stores very little usable fuel on its own, it needs a constant, uninterrupted supply of glucose, or if things get scarce, ketones or lactate, just to keep those electrical neurogradients firing. Let's jump to Section 3, the truth about sugars. Because let me tell you, not all sugars are created equal. One of the biggest myths out there is that the factory floor treats all sugars exactly the same way. Just look at the difference between glucose and fructose. Glucose metabolism is strictly regulated based on the cell's actual energy needs. If the body has enough energy, it just scales back the processing. But fructose, especially when we're talking about massive amounts of added sugars, it completely bypasses a major regulatory step in glycolysis. It basically sneaks right past the factory's quality control checkpoint, totally unchecked. And when that excess unregulated fructose floods the liver, it triggers this wild downward spiral. Because there's no off switch, an enzyme rapidly phosphorylates the fructose. This actually depletes ATP so fast that it traps inorganic phosphate. That sets off an alarm, activating something called AMP deaminase 2, which triggers a whole cascade that produces elevated uric acid and literally forces the liver to start creating brand new fat out of nowhere, a process known as de novo lipogenesis.
Over time, this whole mess contributes to fatty liver disease, which is now called MASLD. Which brings us right to Section 4, fat storage and metabolic syndrome. We need to figure out exactly where the fat goes when the factory produces way more energy than it needs and has to stash it in the bank vault.
And this directly answers that hook we opened with. Where you store fat matters so much. Subcutaneous fat is stored right under the skin. It's the body's natural, relatively safe storage vault. But when that vault gets full, the fat spills over and becomes visceral or ectopic fat. This stuff accumulates around and even inside your critical organs, like the liver, the pancreas, and the heart. It is highly metabolically active, highly inflammatory, and extremely harmful. So, someone who looks totally thin on the outside, they might just have a very small subcutaneous vault, meaning all that dangerous visceral fat is spilling directly into their organs.
So the big takeaway here is that total body weight on a scale doesn't tell the whole story. Medical professionals use these 5 criteria to diagnose metabolic syndrome. If you meet the threshold for 3 or more of these, we're talking increased waist circumference, elevated triglycerides, reduced HDL or good cholesterol, high blood pressure, or elevated fasting blood glucose, you are looking at a significantly high risk for cardiovascular disease, stroke, and type 2 diabetes.
All right, let's pivot to Section 5, insulin, the master regulator. This hormone is essentially the master switch of our entire biological factory. So, when your blood glucose rises after a meal, your pancreas releases insulin. And the sheer range of jobs insulin handles is honestly fascinating. It promotes the uptake of glucose right into the cells. It encourages the body to store energy as glycogen or fat. And it actively inhibits lipolysis, which means it stops the breakdown of stored fat. Basically, insulin shouts a command to your body: store energy right now and stop burning fat. It also acts as a really powerful growth signaling hormone.
But here is exactly where the entire system can break down: the insulin resistance cycle. Remember that harmful ectopic fat we just talked about? Well, when fat droplets accumulate inside your muscle cells, they physically disrupt the internal transport mechanisms. They are basically blocking the doors so glucose can't even get in. So the cells just ignore the insulin signal. Since the blood sugar stays high, the pancreas totally panics and pumps out even more insulin to force those doors open. Over time, this resistance spreads to the liver and drastically shoots up your risk of developing type 2 diabetes.
Okay, Section 6, the holistic health picture. Let's look beyond just the calories, because as we'll see, true metabolic health goes way beyond just what's on your dinner plate. For instance, let's talk about the true biochemical power of movement. Sure, we all know exercise supports the heart and builds muscle, but beneath the surface, muscle contraction does something basically like magic. It absorbs glucose directly from the bloodstream without even needing insulin. Seriously, it's called non-insulin-mediated glucose uptake, or NMIGU. And this is exactly why regular exercise is so phenomenally effective at improving your insulin sensitivity. It literally opens the doors for glucose all by itself. Now let's slow down for a second and think about sleep and stress. You could have an absolutely flawless diet, but if you're sleep deprived, that significantly impairs your insulin sensitivity and glucose regulation after just a few nights. Meanwhile, chronic stress constantly elevates hormones like cortisol and catecholamines. These ramp up your liver's glucose output and are directly linked to hoarding that toxic visceral fat around your organs. Literally, bad sleep and chronic stress alone can break the factory's delicate hormonal balance.
So I want to wrap up this explainer with an incredibly empowering thought. Metabolic health is shaped by activity, sleep, stress, and diet quality, not just calories. It's an entire dynamic ecosystem. Every single choice you make, whether it's taking a walk, finally getting a full night's sleep, or just managing your stress, fundamentally changes the biochemical reality of your cellular factory. So now that you know how this incredible machine actually works, what small change are you going to make today to optimize your own cellular energy factory?